Hi everyone. Today we are going to start our Earth Science unit. In Earth Science, we are going to study everything that's on the Earth. But in particular, we're going to ask the question, why does the Earth look like the way it does? And what are some things that affect the Earth looking the way it does? What I have in front of me is a plate of worms. Actually, a plate of roundworms, or night crawlers, as you may call them. Took a little trip to the pet store and I got a container of worms. You may see them if you are near a park or maybe in your backyard. After it rains, they like to come out. We're gonna see if worms actually help shape the way the Earth looks. Let's take a closer look. Here I have a plate, about a dozen or so worms that look like they're really not doing much. They're entangled inside one another. I'm going to use a spoon and spread them apart and see if we see any more activity. Doesn't look like they're still doing much. I'm going to transfer two of them to another plate and see if we can wake them up a little bit. See a little bit more activity. Starting to move. They've been asleep for some time. They were inside of a small container all packed in together with soil. They like to live in a dark, cool environment. But now they are starting to wake up. I want you to just spend a minute, watch, and see how they move. They kind of remind me of a slinky, where they can expand their body and contract their body. I'm actually going to move onto the bigger plate for a second, and you can watch them as well. Let's see if we can wake them up and have them move a little bit. I'm gonna just give a little bit of water. Not so exciting yet, but they are moving. They are waking up. Now what we want to see is, how do worms affect the way our Earth looks? Now remember, I told you earlier that worms like to live in dark, cold environments. Would those dark, cold environments be above ground or below ground? Below ground, right? They would live underground in the soil where it's both dark and it's cold. Now worms, we saw a little bit of how they move, but worms love to tunnel. They like to go up and down and around and just create tunnels. They are nature's decomposers. That means they get their food, they get their nutrition from the soil as well. Inside the soil, there may be dead leaves, dead tree roots, even dead animals. Now what a decomposer does is it takes that trash, what we call trash, and it actually recycles it. How does it recycle? It eats the dead leaf, it eats the dead trees, and it eats the dead animals. It gets its nutrients, and it produces wastes. And those wastes are actually nutrition for the soil, for the trees. That's why they are nature's recyclers. Now, their tunneling is also very beneficial to earth and to nature. When they tunnel, they're actually creating room for the tree's roots to grow. They're creating room for air. The tree roots get aeration that way through the worms. And tree roots also need water. When they create those tunnels, when the worms create those tunnels, it actually also creates a place for the water to go and travel, follow the tree roots. Worms, we didn't know this, but they're so beneficial. Their tunneling creates aeration, it creates room for tree roots, and it creates room for water to go. And in addition to all of that, what are they doing? They're recycling. They're taking all of the bad parts, all of the dead things that are living inside our soil, and they recycle them. Now, I told you they do all this, but can we see it? Can I see them tunnel? This would be hard to do, right? I would have to go and dig up underground. And if I dig up, I've messed up the tunneling. How can I prove that they are tunneling, that they are moving our earth and changing the way that our earth looks? We have to do an experiment to find out. For this lab, you will need one piece of black construction paper that is provided for you. You will also need a 32-ounce plastic container with a lid that is also provided for you. You will need to provide 2 to 3 cups of sand, 2 to 3 cups of soil, 1 plastic cup or measuring cup, water, paper towel roll cut in half, saran wrap, scissors, a push pin, some dead leaves, and you will need some worms, about a dozen worms, either found from your backyard or purchased from a pet store. Before we start the lab, you will need to prep 2 of your items. The first thing you will need to do is your paper towel roll. You will need to cut it in half. You only need 1/2. Then you will take your saran wrap and cover it. Now, this step does not have to be perfect, as long as your paper towel roll is perfectly covered. Put that off to the side. Now, with the help of an adult, you will take the push pin and you will need to poke holes in the lid of this container. Very, very carefully, you'll take your push pin and you want to poke holes all throughout the lid of your container. Make sure your fingers are safe and nowhere near the push pin. And your lid should look like this. Now, using the materials I just showed you, we are going to create an environment for worms to live in that they will think is their home. Now, this is going to go right inside of your container, and this will serve as a space saver. We are going to layer into this container 7 layers of soil and sand, alternating soil and sand. Then we're going to place the worms inside. The reason I'm putting the paper towel roll here is the worms would love to go to the center where it's the darkest. I want to create a very, very thin area for them to be able to travel so that I can see what they're doing. So this is just serving as just a space saver so that we have a small window to be able to see the worms' activities. Now that I have my paper towel roll covered with saran wrap inside of my container, I'm going to take a plastic cup and I'm going to fill it up a little less than half, and I'm going to pour it inside the container and then shake it around so that it's even all around. If you need to use a spoon or a measuring or a popsicle stick to move the soil around, you can do that. The next thing I'm going to do is use my cup. Again, add half a cup of sand all around. And again, shake it all around. And I'm going to keep doing this till I get to the very, very top. Each time, I may need to hold the paper towel roll. Let's add some more sand. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 layers so far. Let's add my soil. And don't worry if soil gets inside the paper towel roll. It's fine. Guys, see how the layers are nice and even? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. Let's add our 6th layer. Now I have added 6 layers to this container. Inside here, I'm going to add my worms, not inside the paper towel roll, but all around. Before I add my worms though, I'm going to add one very important ingredient. That is the ingredient that all living organisms need to survive, and that's water. I'm going to use a syringe and I'm going to add water. And the water that you may add may be different. The amount that you add may be different depending on how moist your soil is. So far I've added 50 milliliters, but what the goal is I want the water to travel all the way down. Once I have water in all 7 layers, then I know I've added the right amount. That's 100 milliliters. I'm going to keep adding. This is 150 milliliters. Looks like the water is coming down, but I do need another 50. And this doesn't have to be an exact measurement. Now you'll notice I have 6 very, very even layers of sand and soil, and I can perfectly see each layer. Now I have to add my secret ingredient, and that's going to be my worms. I'm going to take the worms apart, and I'm going to add them one by one. It's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and one more just for good measure, that's 13. Now I told you we're gonna have a 7-layer, and so far we've only have 6 layers. What's the last thing they're going to need? Well, they're gonna need food. They're gonna need something to decompose. You're going to take your leaves and just arrange them right on the top. You can break them apart to make them fit. And last, you have your lid that you poked your holes in. And you want to just bend this so that it doesn't poke out. And then you're going to add your cover the lid. And I didn't tell you why, but why do you think we poked holes in there? It's for air. It's so that there's air getting into this container. Now that it's completely sealed, we are almost done, but not quite. Now what you want to do is take a minute and observe what your container looks like right now. On your observation sheet, where it says today, draw and label what your container looks like. Perfect layers of soil, sand, soil, sand, soil, sand. And label everything you've put in there. So let's review, what did we put in there besides the soil and the sand? We put dead leaves. Those dead leaves were the food for the worms. And we put in worms. And we put in one other very important ingredient, the water. Living organisms cannot survive without water. Go ahead and record what your container looks like right now. Now I told you these worms like to live in cold, dark environments. Well, it's not very dark right now. We want them to live in complete darkness. That's where you're going to take your construction paper, your black construction paper, and just wrap it around your container. Not too tight because you want to be able to take it on and off. Using a small piece of tape. Seal the side. And with another piece of tape, we'll just take the corners of the top and fold them down. Another piece of tape. Close it off. And now we've created a dark environment. We're going to store these containers in a cool place. They could be inside or outside your home, maybe on a patio. And we're going to watch them for the next 2 weeks. Now that your container is almost done, you're going to make a prediction or a hypothesis. You're going to predict what will happen to these layers in 2 weeks. Will there still be perfect layers of soil and sand and soil and sand? Or do you think something else will happen? Based on what we have learned about the worms and what they like to do, go ahead, make a prediction. Again, draw what your container you think will look like in 2 weeks. Same as before, make sure you label. Once you've made your prediction, now these containers need to be stored in a cool place. We're not going to touch them. We're not going to give them anything else. They have everything they need. The only thing you're going to do is, in a week, we're going to take this off and take a peek, put it back on and store it. Then again in 2 weeks and look and see what has happened, what has changed. Can't wait to see what's gonna happen here. 1 week has passed and I've kept my container in a safe, cool place, and I've been able to keep it dark with this black cover. I'm gonna take the black cover off. Let's investigate and see what it looks like now. So if you remember, when we first assembled our container, we had layers of sand and soil, which were really obvious. Now if we look, do we see layers? Cannot see where the sand starts and when the soil ends, or vice versa. What is still here though are the last 2 layers. The sand layer and the soil layer have not been disrupted yet. And why is that? Well, where did we put the worms? At the very, very, very top. And it looks like they are working their way down and they have not made it to the bottom layer. But if we look at the top, can we see layers? Not really, but what we do see are the worms that seem to be tunneling. And these tunnels, remember, create space for tree roots, space for air, and space for water. And right here, around the worm, is where you see the space, the hollow space that's been created. And here too. This is where the worm was, and it moved, and it created this empty space that right now is filled with air, but will one day be filled with water or a tree root. And if these worms need food, remember, at the very top, we put dead leaves for them to decompose. Let's give it 1 more week and observe again. 2 weeks have passed. Now let's look at our container. We're gonna take the cover off, take a closer look and see what's going on. Now that 2 weeks have passed, let's look at the container and see. In the very, very top, we don't see any layers anymore. We don't know where the sand layers were. We don't know where the soil layers were. We can see evidence of tunneling though, from where our worms seem to be moving around. And then if we go and look below, we can still see a little bit of these last 2 layers that are left. But what do you notice here? If we look a little bit closer, now there is more evidence of tunneling. These are worms that are passing through the sand layer, going down to the soil. And here's another gap, another tunnel that's been created by the worms. All throughout the bottom, we see these tunnels that have been created. Now go ahead and observe your container and make sure to record your observations on your observation sheet, making sure to label exactly what you're seeing. Now, just to review, we wanted to do an experiment to show you that the Earth is shaped by many, many different ways. And one of those ways is by worms. Now, these worms are shaping our Earth, but is this a process that's happening slow or fast? It's slow. It's very, very, very slow. This was just a tiny little small container, and even just a tiny small portion of the container, because remember, we had filled the inside with a space holder with a paper towel roll so that it would have less space. And after 2 weeks, what we noticed is the worms moved all around, created tunnels, and all of the different layers got all mixed up together. Now what you can do at home is leave these containers for up to another 2 weeks and keep observing them. Once the 2 weeks are up, what you want to do is open up the container and empty the worms and the soil and the sand, maybe in a yard somewhere, and then you can recycle the plastic and the paper towel rolls. This is not something you want to keep forever and ever, because worms will not last forever. Good luck with your experiment.